So earlier this month, EA was kind enough and invited us to a hands-on event for Dragon Age: The Veilguard. Of course, the game's initial reception was, let's just say, not as stellar as some might have hoped to be, but after 7 hours of pure gameplay, both early and high level, it's getting harder and harder for me to contain my excitement for it. The combat is by far some of the best I've seen in the series, build potential seems great, level design appears pretty fun, and so far the story is doing a pretty solid job at pulling me in. Now, some quick thanks are in order because I wasn't able to make the trip myself, but Zane, being the cool dude that he is, did manage to cover for me. So you're going to find out a lot more information about the game on his channel that you're going to find linked down below. Now, the interesting point about the Dragon Age series is that BioWare has never truly settled on a specific aesthetic or gameplay design. It always changed from game to game, for better or worse, and Veilguard is no exception. However, that also has its upsides, and that is that you never know what to truly expect. But let me tell you, at least gameplay-wise, I don't think any of you will be disappointed by this. After checking out with Zane, we both pretty much agreed that the combat and skills are genuinely very fun, both to play as well as to look at. Not only did BioWare not lose its touch on making very engaging and impactful combat, they actually took it to the next level by taking inspiration from some of their other projects, such as the combo synergies that we got from Mass Effect, and truly woven all of that into an action-packed game that offers a lot of ways to tackle challenges. That becomes immediately obvious once you take a deep dive into the skill trees. They appear more complex than ever before because they definitely contain a lot more choices than some of the previous games ever did. Well, maybe with one or two exceptions, but you can think of these as constellations broken down into 3 main parts. And typically every class has areas affecting damage, defenses, or crowd control abilities. But on top of that, we also have the 3 outliers, the 3 specializations at the edges once you hit level 20, which will provide even stronger skills and ultimates. And most of these skills are completely new, but there are some that are making a return from the previous games. So for example, you'll see familiar options such as the 1000 Cuts, which used to be a Tempest ability back in Inquisition. Now it's part of the Duelist skill set. And I'm not going to lie, this looks like a dream for somebody like me who really enjoys build crafting for the max possible damage. As you may or may not know, I enjoy testing out different builds for RPGs. This looks like a dream come true from that perspective. It also helps that there are many active skills within these constellations, and even the passives provide interesting category-wide buffs. Pretty much, if you played Inquisition, some of these will look familiar. Of course, just like before, we can only have one specialization active at a time, but with this new layout, it doesn't feel restrictive at all. It seems that there's a great potential for build diversity, and that is because you don't just have the 3 specializations, but also the 3 sections within the skill trees, each affecting different skills and providing different mechanics. Plus, you can easily reset them back at the lighthouse, so you can always have incentives to try out a different setup, especially if your current one is not really up for the challenges ahead. Also, on a similar note, I do want to address one of the biggest controversies about this game, which is the supposed dumbing down of the combat system and reduction of active skills. But let me tell you this, that's as far from the truth as it can possibly be. The combat is way more advanced, has way more systems in it, and the number of active skills is at least on par with the ones in Inquisition, if not maybe slightly more. And that is because instead of wasting slots on your skill bar, many of them have their own keybinds or button combinations like in most action games out there. So just to give you a quick example, we have light attack with the left click, but then we can also pull a ranged attack with the right click, which is basically either the bow for the rogue or, for example, this damage beam from our mage. But there's also heavy attack, which you pull off by either holding down the light attack or using shift plus light attack. And on top of this, we also have sprinting and jumping attacks, which all perform completely different moves that may be better at different things, especially so destroying enemy defenses or pushing them back. And on top of all of this, we then also have blocks and dodges, including a double dodge fade mechanic. And that is before even talking about swapping weapon sets. Like for example, in the case of the mages, they have the staff, but they also get to swap to the orb and dagger, which offers a completely different moveset, which follows a similar set of rules, and this is much better suited at close range damage. And then on top of all of this is when we get the 3 active skills the fourth ultimate active, the active weapon runes, and the combat synergies. I'm telling you, the combat is complex, it feels good, and there are lots of skills to pull off in combat. Maybe even more compared to before, now that we have to worry about all of these synergies with our party mates. It really feels that this is BioWare action in its purest and best form. Between abilities, the skill tree, and the loot system, there are many things you can do to fiddle and really personalize how you play with each and every single class, as well as specialization. Now, it's not all sugar and honey. The more we looked into it, the more some of the design decisions made even less sense, and I still think that there's absolutely no reason for the removal of the tactical camera. I'm not even sure if this is some kind of gameplay limitation, but oftentimes you just spend a good minute or so while deciding what to cast next. You know, strategizing and being all tactical about the combat. An overhead view here would have helped so much to give you a better perspective over the battlefield and what to plan out next. I get the choice to shift to a more action-oriented game, but when you get to use it, it simply doesn't look good. It looks more like a deliberate limitation rather than a purposeful and mindful design choice. I can somewhat see why they have done so, because it may be harder now to pan the camera given that your mouse control, at least right now, is used to point skill synergies between you and your allies. Don't get me wrong, those are impactful and satisfying as heck, but spending that pause time just from the perspective of, well, basically your character's back feels quite limited. Combos, however, are strong, no doubt about it. They are some of the most fun aspects of BioWare combat, albeit slightly changed compared to some of the previous entries, especially from the Mass Effect series. So on one side, there's a slight delay now before they even trigger. Second of all, you will also see a range AoE indicator popping up when the explosion is about to happen, which is going to be a pretty good way to just identify the range that it affects the targets in. And third of all, it also applies a secondary effect as well. So you may apply effects that completely shatter enemy defenses, which can be really helpful because a lot of them have armor or shields. Or even more so, apply the very useful Overwhelm debuff, which essentially means a pretty long stun duration on the affected target. Now you can also stun them similarly and overwhelm them by applying pressure to the bar above their HP, which is going to happen naturally as you cast stronger and stronger abilities, but this is just much faster and much better. And this will help a ton when dealing with various enemy resistances, or if you're playing on higher difficulty challenges or just going in the pure endgame. Plus, combo detonations continue to have the same guaranteed critical strikes from the previous BioWare games, so all in all, this is likely how you're going to spend your time when you start creating your perfect party synergy. Now, our hands-on session started with the character creation screen, which is way more extensive than, well, pretty much any BioWare game ever. This is literally the most advanced BioWare character creator in existence. And I really want to commend them because it genuinely seems like you can make good-looking characters. You have many options for pretty much everything. And yeah, these characters continue to look good through cutscenes and normal gameplay as well. Well, that is if you put in the extra effort, not like Zane here, who created a pretty ugly abomination that for some reason looked like it was ripped out of a PS2 era game and thrown in with some really nice current gen looking companions. But looking at some of the other previews, like especially IGN, the characters look way better, so if you put in the extra effort, they will definitely look way better. You still have the pick between different choices of lineage, so this includes the same old human, elves, dwarves, and Qunari, except passives are no longer handled by your lineage. Instead, you get extra ones from the faction choices this time around. We'll have a bigger breakdown of that on the channel really soon. In the meantime, I think that most folks out there will spend hours upon hours just in the character creator alone, fine-tuning all of the sliders. There are some for literally every single part of the face, of the head, of the body. There's even like chest size sliders, there's even nudity options and all of that, so you're not going to be disappointed. Once you've settled on the looks, you can then jump into your class selection between the rogue warrior and the mage, including a preview of each and their respective specializations to kind of have a better sense of how they play, including some of their best abilities in the preview. Then you get to jump into your selection of factions. Now, this is going to give you a choice between 6 different ones you can initially align to, but that doesn't mean you can't just go ahead and increase reputation with others in the full gameplay. This just means that you gain some extra dialogues with members of the said faction. You also gain an increase in the XP rate when improving your reputation with them, plus an extra buff right here, a passive at the bottom, which is now, like I said, handled by the choice of factions. So it can be something like holding more potions, or having your resources generating faster, or just helping some of the other class mechanics and give you general buffs that may not completely affect the gameplay, but are still nonetheless quite helpful. Once you've decided on all of this, you will then move into choosing your playstyle, which is basically your difficulty choices. And these are going to just affect stuff like how much damage you receive, how much HP enemies have, how good or bad are the parry windows, and so on and so forth. And there's even ways to customize that and kind of make your own difficulty if you don't want to go with adventurer or some of the other options. Now, once you're in, this is pretty much going to put you during the same events as we've seen unfolding in the first gameplay demo. So the part that we saw in Mirethus plays pretty much the exact same as it did in the first reveal this summer. So that part leading to Solas, of course, also catching up with what happened in the story. We also have Varric that accompanies us and gives us a rundown of the things that unfolded from Inquisition. And of course, just playing catch up for those of you who have not played Inquisition or forgot the events of it, especially in the later parts. But this being the prologue, it's going to be a lot more linear. There isn't much exploration like how some of the other zones that definitely open up way more once we get to progress a bit further down the line. So I do want to talk about some of these other zones as well, including exploration and graphics. I think that the game just looks absolutely gorgeous. Like, the YouTube compression just doesn't make it justice. Yeah, some of these zones look very distinct from one another. They feel very unique. There's always something unique about their atmosphere that you don't see repeating itself too much. It's going to play very different in the Erlathan Forest than how it is, for example, in the Sea of Blood, or when you go to the Antivan capital of Treviso, or when you're just playing in Weishaupt. So there are many other such locations that have something unique to them. Also, of course, we had the lighthouse as well as the crossroads, playable areas during the gameplay demos. So all of these areas do a great job at offering you a unique experience and open up a lot of adjacent routes to explore. I think this is also a good time to also address another concern with the game, which is the levels of high fantasy. A lot of people call this game cartoonish, very PG friendly, and even though that does appear to be the case early on in places like the Erlathan Forest, it definitely changes the mood a lot as you progress further down the line, like in the Sea of Blood, the Crossroads, or any other parts severely affected by the Blight. You're going to start seeing a lot more horrifically mutated Darkspawn, and also characters affected by the Blight. There's this very gorish mutation going on that affects some of the inhabitants over there, and there are some reasons why this is happening. And I think that seems very interesting. It looks really compelling, and it's definitely not the same high fantasy vibe that we have in the early stages. Which also brings us to another topic, and that is exploration. When I first heard Veilguard is a lot more linear in its approach than the previous games, I was a bit worried that we would get bored by it very soon, like maybe just having a theme park of a game and not much to do otherwise. Well, thankfully it doesn't seem that's the case, at least not entirely, and indeed it may not be open world like some of the maps in Inquisition, but that doesn't mean there isn't a lot of exploration to do. Like, the most immediate comparison I can give is probably God of War on the PlayStation 4 and more recently God of War Ragnarok. Like, remember how we used to maybe see treasures or entryways in places just out of reach that maybe had secret entrances from different sides? Well, it's kind of like that here as well. You have your main path, which typically leads you to the main narrative. That one may be filled with enemies, with puzzles, with things to explore, but then you also have your side routes, which don't always open up outright. Usually they are adjacent areas that lead to secret treasures or even bonus encounters. It also helps that maps feature again the same progression track as they did in Inquisition, so you're going to see how much of them you discovered, including the number of chests you found, the mini bosses, and there are typically over a dozen per each of these maps as you play in them. So there's quite a lot of exploration to do despite the more linearity of the game design. And I'm gonna tell you this, there are so many caches of loot, so many containers with money, crafting resources, as well as scrolls that provide extra codex entries for some extra lore for you. And some of the areas can only be opened by special partner skills. So these skills you'll find at the top of the skill HUD, and almost every companion has one of them. And the thing is that you don't even have to have that companion with you at all times to access said skill. So for example, Lucaris can reveal fade anomalies in places where the boundaries between realities are fading, which can actually open up new platforms or routes ahead so that you can reach areas that are normally inaccessible. Now, sprinkled in between these, we also have our player hubs. There are many of them. We have towns, we have multiple cities, we even have the lighthouse, which of course is, yeah, the Skyhold 2.0, but except this time around, it's in the Fade and it's better connected to some of the other maps. So we somehow get this from Solus early on. We cannot really talk about that as that's still under the embargo, but at first it's kind of run down and abandoned. But as you move in with your companions and as you explore a bit of it, this is going to then gradually change over time. And we've seen there are some vendors that sell items that appear to be customization specifically for parts in the lighthouse. So again, kind of like how you could decorate the throne room back in the Skyhold. It also seems we have done away with the word table from Inquisition, with missions now being granted a lot more organically. So either by finding or talking to NPCs out into the world. That of course on top of the fact that you follow the main story. Also, unlike Skyhold, the lighthouse is a lot more interconnected with the remaining world via these magical mirrors called Illuvians, and they will let you actually fast travel to new locations. You are going to have fast travel in this game, but initially you're going to have to find them before you discover these new places. And for some of these locations, technically you're not even connected to them, you're connected to the crossroads, which is kind of like a connection between the Fade and the real world, and in turn this is going to let you travel to those new locations. Now, like I said, besides the lighthouse, we have the other hubs, including the huge cities, the faction outposts, and other towns that we get to go into and help people out. In the ongoing war against the Blight, you're bound to work with the factions in this game, which is how you're going to acquire new quests. And these quests are often tied to that area you've been into. So it's rather connected to the main story as well, in a sense. You're not just going to do pick-me-up quests or fetch quests like in Inquisition. That's definitely not something that you're going to do here much. Plus, they tend to serve an extra purpose, which is to boost your reputation with specific factions. So like I said, there are 6 of them in total, and it's not just the one you align yourself with in the character creation. You can also go in and, yeah, basically help them as well and still gain access to additional faction items. Now, I'm not sure exactly the full extent of this and what it is, if we can also get the faction related, for example, attire, but it does seem that there's quite a bit of it that we can still unlock from some of the early gameplay we had. Which kind of brings us to the loot system. Another cool thing about this is that item upgrades are easily one of the best mechanics in this game. The way you upgrade items in this game is going to be somewhat different than some of the other RPGs you may be used to. So it's not just for yourself, it's also for your companion. But when hovering over an item that just dropped, you will see the item comparison screen for the person for who that item is designed for. So it's going to be separate for you and for your team members. Loot also appears to be really impactful and mostly dependent on quality. So the more you go from common to rare to eventually legendary, the higher the stats and the more extra bonuses you're going to see unlocking on them. So these bonuses almost always provide extra buffs, increase in stats, or even synergize with existing abilities or class mechanics. Now, BioWare also made an interesting addition via the Caretaker upgrades. This gives you direct control over the power of the loot that drops as you get to increase the strength of the shop. So it goes from 1 to +10. So if you upgrade the shop to +10, then the loot that drops for you will also be +10. But they went a step above, and another interesting mechanic is that duplicates are also important in this game. So let's say you found a very good, maybe +1 green weapon early on, but you want to keep it. Well, if you find or buy a duplicate of it, you will then power up your initial item both in terms of increasing its power to your current maximum, but also increasing its rarity to the next available. So in this case, you can jump from green all the way to rare quality. And that's a really creative way to make use of gear that normally gets phased out or left behind, and something that just occupies inventory slots for no reason. Honestly, the more I see of it, the more I think it, should be a staple in any RPG game out there. Now, we do have a couple more points I want to cover. One of them is companions. I'm not going to lie, at first I wasn't completely sold on their overall aesthetics. I think that the older ones, especially as recent as Inquisition, had a lot more personality to them, though I will admit this is just 7 hours in Veilguard, so things may change in the full game. I'm not too big on romance options either in video games anyway, it's just not my thing, so I don't typically care about these things. But I do if they provide some great benefits like unique items and whatnot. It does seem that some companion skills are acquired depending on the relationship level you have with them, so I'm not sure exactly how I feel about that. I do know that you can romance every single character in the game, but they also get to romance each other, so if you wait for too long, you might lose an opportunity with them. We've actually seen a glimpse of that in the gameplay preview, because at some point we had a clock icon next to the chat bubbles at the lighthouse, next to the places that these companions inhabited. So it seems that some of the dialogues are a limited time, and if you progress too much in the story, you may lose the chance to progress furthermore in that relationship for that specific part. That, or maybe delay it to some extent. Combat-wise, companions will have a more condensed skill tree compared to ours, and also fewer item slots, but this is mostly related to armor and weapons, so this still means that you can customize them, provide different builds, and still have them useful in combat. It's just that it's not going to be maybe on the same scale as before, but like I said, the number of skills don't really feel low in combat anyway, so it's going to make up from other sources. And finally, the only other thing remaining, I guess, is the photo mode. We, did have a glimpse into the photo mode, and in action it looks pretty much on par with any photo mode. You have all the controls over the camera, depth of field, autofocus and all of that, frames, hiding or showing different characters and enemies on the battlefield. So you definitely have all of the things that you need over there if you really enjoy taking screenshots of your character or these environments. Anyway, that is about it with the first impressions. A lot more will follow soon with exclusive gameplay and new features on the channel. So if you want to see more of Veilguard, make sure you subscribe to the channel and activate that notification bell. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.